Nintendo is announcing that they are ending production of their NES and SNES Classic consoles. I believe after the holiday, they announced this in an interview with the Hollywood Reporter on Monday. Company said that after the current stock sells out, the classic gaming systems will not return to the shelves in the U.S. Hey, thanks, advertisement. So they've said that the current systems are the extent of their classic program. That's what Reggie says. And as they stated when they brought back the NES Classic, that they were going to be available through the holiday season
of this year. Because it came back for sale this spring, right? So they announced that, I think it was like a year ago they announced it, before it was come back, that it'll be sold through the end of this year.
Yeah, I think it was the beginning of this year. They were basically like, okay, we're bringing back the NES Classic. We realized that there was a problem. We're going to make them available.
Because the Super Nintendo came out last summer, a year and a half ago almost.
So they've kept the Super Nintendo in churning. This summer, instead of doing another Classic, essentially, which is what... Because it was... This summer was bringing back the NES Classic. Last summer was SNES Classic. Summer before that was NES Classic. So this summer was the relaunch, and they were like, okay, we're going to keep these both in production until after the holidays.
And actually make money.
And
sell them.
And they did. So they're announcing the end of this run. Now, some people seem to be a little bit upset about this. I understand that people want these on the shelves forever, and there have been some pretty solid. There are some decent arguments for it. I think it was Chris Kohler on Kotaku was like, this is where Nintendo was trying. This was how Nintendo could, whether they were trying to or not, this was how Nintendo could meet people in the middle. I think it was a good point he made. I think it was him who said that this was kind of like the Nintendo selling their games on like the App Store for 99 cents. These bundles were how people who didn't want to Switch or just wanted to play some, Nintendo classic games could get their fix without having a Switch. Without having a Switch or buying a new system.
Sure.
And I get that, and I do see that. On the other hand,
this is not what Nintendo does.
They don't make toys. And
not anymore.
And with the abundance of these that I tend to see when I go out shopping, I wonder if after this holiday season, there's going to be a big enough market for this to even warrant Nintendo continuing to produce them. I don't know that this is necessarily a bad move on Nintendo's part. The way they released the NES Classic the first time was awful. But they released the Super Nintendo Classic properly, and then they released the NES Classic properly. I feel like anyone who's wanted one of these had to have
gotten by now.
They've had the time to do it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that, like we saw with the NES Classic coming back, and I realize that production line space is at a premium and things like that, but it doesn't mean that Nintendo was closing the door forever on these things coming back. But if they never did, the market had been, I feel like, probably saturated with these.
Sure. Yeah. At this point, if you go on eBay, even looking at the secondhand market, they're available. You can get an NES Classic for $60.
Right.
On eBay, secondhand. I don't know if you can still find them in stores. Last time I went to Target, there was plenty of Super Nintendo Classics. I don't remember the NES.
I'm not sure about NES, but I mean, I know that I had seen them in recent.
You've gotten the whole point is this, what Ian's saying, is that you've had your chance with it coming back this almost full year back in business here. They've restocked these. You've had your chance to get one at $60 without paying a scalper. You have.
Right.
And the same for the Super Nintendo. Super Nintendo's been out for a year and a half, and that was available well from the beginning, the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, I noticed a little bit of supply problem, but I mean, within like 2 months of those coming out, I never, if I needed to pick one up, there were numerous opportunities where I could.
Yeah, it wasn't like the NES Classic where there was no supply. It was ridiculous. So, yeah. If you say, well, Nintendo makes Amiibo, yeah, Amiibos are little trinkets that are a lot less complicated to produce than a fucking NES Classic. That takes, you have to develop the software for it, you have to do the hardware, you got to have someone make it, and then you can have supply problems. It's just it's probably for Nintendo a business they didn't want to get into. Reggie said originally the NES Classic was a bridge between nothing in 2016 for that holiday season. If they had nothing going on that year. This is pre-Switch. Wii U's already been dead forever at that point. So they said erroneously though that this is like a holiday product to get people to know about the NES Classic, but they never advertised the NES Classic on TV. They never advertised the SNES Classic on TV. I've seen a billion commercials for the PS Classic. So for them, this was never to them something they were going to, you know, that was going to be their bread and butter. This is always going to be to them, I guess, a bonus that they could do on the side. And Nintendo didn't want to focus on it. Unfortunately, I still think they could. I still think they could. And I still think you're going to get another classic eventually. Even though they said no N64 classic, I think eventually they might revisit it in a few years.
No, I think they will too. It's not surprising to me that they did not change their mind. It's not surprising to me that this is not going to be something that they would. It's not surprising to me that this isn't something they will focus on year round.
No.
Or constantly.
And they do have their Switch Online service, which is not based on the NES or Super Nintendo, but that will become a tenet of their marketing. You will get all this software, and we're releasing NES games each month. I just released a few more with Lolo, your buddy. So I mean, that this is not Nintendo space. Even though they could make it their space in some way, I don't see them dedicating their whole time to it, like you said, all year round. Mm-hmm. If it's something they do every other year, every once in a while in a blue moon, maybe that makes more sense for them to do.
And if they do bring it back, I honestly, at least with the NES Classic, I would feel. Maybe with the Super NES Classic too, I would almost say that you would see maybe half the same games and half new games too. I mean,
sure,
you know, who knows? But it's not a surprise.
And in other news, timing, I just got my NES Switch controllers in the mail the other day.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Still need to order those.
I was like, you got a limited amount of time I think to do it.
You just wanted to touch the mushroom.
I did want to touch the mushroom.